I shouldn't be able to feel other people's secrets just by touching their things, but I can. And the first time I touched the iron gate of the Shin estate in Incheon, I felt four different kinds of trouble bleeding through the metal, like a warning I was too broke to listen to. I touched it anyway. My name is Rio, Park Ryo, 22 years old, certified Omega, and currently standing outside the most intimidating residential compound in all of Incheon, with two bags, one cracked phone screen, and an exactly 43,001 to my name. 43,001. That's 3 ramyeon packets and a bruised ego. I got the job through a placement agency that asked me exactly two questions. Could I cook? Yes. Could I keep my mouth shut? I said yes to that one too, which was honestly the bigger lie. The listing said household servant, 4 residents, private compound, Incheon's Yeonsu district, full room and board included, monthly salary that made my eyes water. It did not say 4 Korean mafia alphas who looked like they were carved from cold marble and bad decisions. That part I found out myself. The gate swung open before I could knock, and a man appeared who was not one of the 4. He was older, thin, with the kind of face that had seen too much and forgotten none of it. He introduced himself as Manager O and looked me up and down the way people look at furniture they're not sure will fit the room. Park Ryo, he said, not a question. Ooh, that's me, I said. In the flesh. All of it. He did not smile. He turned and walked, which I understood to mean follow me. The compound was enormous. Traditional architecture wrapped in modern security. Stone walls, security cameras at angles that covered everything. Gardens so perfectly maintained they looked artificial. I counted 2 guards before we reached the front door and stopped counting after that because the number was becoming stressful. I am a psychometrist. It sounds impressive until you explain what it actually means. I touch objects and I read them, their history, the emotions soaked into them, the memories left behind by the hands that held them. I've had this ability since I was 14, and I've learned exactly one thing from it. People leave more of themselves behind in their belongings than they ever intend to. I don't advertise this, mostly because people find it unsettling, occasionally because the things I see are none of my business. Mine always because knowing too much about people who haven't chosen to tell you anything is a loneliness I can't fully explain. Manager O led me through a hallway that smelled like cedar and something darker underneath, expensive cologne layered over tension. My fingers brushed the wall once without thinking, and I yanked them back. Not yet. Not before I even knew where the kitchen was. The 4 residents will not be home until this evening, Manager O said. He'd leading me to a room on the east side of the main house. Clean, simple, a window that faced the garden. You will have meals prepared by 7. The house rules are posted on the inside of your door. You will follow them without exception. Sure, I said, setting my bags down. Any rules I should know about verbally? Things that didn't make the list? He paused at the door. Do not ask personal questions. Do not enter the 3rd floor without permission. And do not touch anything in the main office. Noted. And do not stare at them. I blinked. At who? He gave me one last look that carried the weight of a man who had watched many people before me make the same mistakes. You'll understand tonight, he said and left. I understood at 7:14 p.m. I heard them before I saw them. 4 voices in the entryway, speaking low and fast, the kind of Korean that moves like the conversation started 3 hours ago, and the door just interrupted it. I was standing at the kitchen island, plating food with hands that were only slightly trembling when they walked in. The first thing I noticed was the scent, 4 distinct alpha scents hitting the air simultaneously. Pine resin and smoke. Something cold like rain on concrete. Black tea and iron. And underneath all of it, something warm and amber that I couldn't place yet. The second thing I noticed was that they were all looking at me. Not the food. Me. The tallest one, my broad-shouldered with sharp eyes and a jaw that could cut glass, said nothing. He simply looked at me the way people look at things that have appeared in places they didn't expect them. I looked back, because I am Park Rio, and I do not look away first. You're the new one, the one with the cold rain scent said. He was leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, voice flat. Observant, I said. The food's getting cold. Silence. Then from the one I hadn't focused on yet, a standing slightly behind the others, the one with the amber scent, the quietest one, the smallest pull of a smile, gone before it fully arrived. I felt it anyway, and against every instinct I had, I filed it away like it mattered. It didn't. It absolutely did not. I repeated that to myself while I finished plating the food with hands that were now fully steady. Thank you very much. Because I am a professional, and professionals do not get flustered by pretty alphas with amber scents and half smiles that disappear before they're even real. I slid the last plate onto the dining table and straightened up. Food's on the table, I announced like I was not currently standing in a room that smelled like 4 different flavors of dangerous. Dwaejiguk bap, kimchi on the side, barley rice. Eat before it gets cold. Nobody moved immediately. The tall one with the glass-cutting jaw was still watching me. Not aggressively, not warmly either. Just with the focused stillness of someone cataloging information. It was the kind of look that made you feel like you were being filed somewhere. I did not enjoy being filed. Is there a problem with the food, I asked. No, he said. Then why is everyone standing? The one with the cold rain scent, still leaning against the door frame, tilted his head slightly. You're not what I expected. Nobody ever is, I said. Sit down. They sat. I still don't fully understand why. 4 grown alpha men in an Incheon mafia compound, each one radiating enough authority to silence a room, and they sat down because a 22-year-old Omega with 43,001 and a cracked phone told them the food was getting cold. Maybe they were hungry. Maybe I caught them off guard. Maybe I'll never understand alphas, and that's honestly fine with me. The manager O appeared from a side door, saw them sitting, saw me standing at the kitchen entrance with my arms crossed, and his expression shifted into something I couldn't read. Surprise, maybe, or something older than surprise. Recognition. He disappeared again without a word. I learned their names that night in pieces, the way you learn things in a house that doesn't explain itself. The tall one with the sharp jaw was Shin, 29, the eldest, and the one the others oriented toward without seeming to realize they were doing it. When he spoke even casually, the air in the room changed texture. He ate in clean, precise movements and didn't look at me again after that first assessment, which should have felt like relief and instead felt like being dismissed, which annoyed me more than I wanted to admit. The cold rain one was Shin Minjun, 28. He shared a surname with Jaeho, which I filed away. Cousins, maybe, Hanni, or something more complicated. He spoke the least during dinner and watched the most. His eyes tracked movement the way a person does when they've spent years in rooms where the wrong movement gets someone hurt. He caught me looking at him once and didn't look away. Neither did I. We stayed like that for 3 full seconds before I decided I was bored and looked at the food instead. I was not bored. The third one introduced himself directly, which surprised me. Kwon Sung-hoon, he said. When he caught me refilling the barley rice. 28. He had the kind of face that smiled easily, which in my experience means either genuinely warm or very well practiced. His scent was black tea and iron, and it sat in the air like punctuation. You're braver than the last 3. Last 3 what? I asked. Servants. I set the rice down. What happened to them? He smiled. They quit. Voluntarily? Mostly. I looked at him for a moment. No, that's not as reassuring as you think it is. He laughed. It was a real one. I noted that and moved on. The 4th one I had to learn by observation because he offered nothing voluntarily. He sat at the far end of the table, slightly removed from the others the way someone positions themselves when they're present, but not entirely arrived. Dark eyes, quiet hands, the amber scent that I had noticed first and I still couldn't categorize properly. He ate without comment. I listened without visible reaction, and when dinner ended, he was the first one to leave the table. He paused once in the doorway. I was collecting plates and my hand wrapped around the edge of his bowl before I thought about it, and the psychometry hit me before I could pull back. Warmth. Something guarded and aching underneath it, like a room that used to have furniture and now only has the marks on the floor where it stood. Careful, deliberately careful, The kind of careful that takes years to build. I let go of the bowl. He was already gone. I stood there for a second, holding the information I hadn't asked for, which is the thing about psychometry that nobody tells you. You don't always want what you find. Manager O appeared in the doorway. The one who just left, I said, keeping my voice neutral. What's his name? Yoon Da-hyun, he said, 27, and Park Rio. Yes? I told you not to stare. I wasn't staring, I said, and I was observing. There's a difference. He looked at me for a long moment. Get some rest, he said finally. Tomorrow starts early. I looked down at the bowl still in my hand. Careful, the warmth had said. Deliberately careful. I put the bowl in the sink and told myself it meant nothing. Well, that's what I told myself at 6 a.m. the next morning, when I was standing in the kitchen grinding coffee beans and trying not to think about a bowl that felt like a locked room and a man who smelled like amber and old wounds. It meant nothing, and I was going to keep it that way. The house had a different quality in the early morning. Quieter, obviously, but not just that. Stiller, like it was holding something in before the day started. I moved through it carefully, not learning the geography the way I always do in new places, not just where things are, but what they carry. The kitchen was clean and functional and emotionally neutral, which I appreciated. The hallway leading to the main sitting room had a low hum of stress soaked into the walls. Years of it, the kind that comes from many serious conversations held in close quarters. I did not touch the walls. I am capable of restraint. Occasionally, Jae-ho came downstairs first, 6:23 a.m. exactly. I know because I had been watching the clock the way you watch something when you're pretending not to be nervous. He was already dressed, full suit, not a single thing out of place. He moved through the kitchen like he had an internal map of it and stopped at the island where I had set out coffee. He looked at it. Then he looked at me. You made Americano, he said. I did, I said. I drink black coffee. No water added. I looked at him. That's what Americano is. A pause. A something shifted behind his eyes, brief and unreadable. He picked up the cup, drank, and said nothing else. He took his coffee to the far end of the island and opened a document on his phone, and that was apparently the entirety of our morning interaction. I turned back to the stove. That felt like a win. I'm counting it as a win. Minjin came down at 6:47 and walked directly to the coffee without acknowledging my existence, which honestly I respected. He poured his own cup, which I also respected. He stood by the window drinking it and looking out at the garden with the expression of a man who was already 3 problems deep into his morning before he'd spoken a word. Sung-hoon arrived at 7:02, took one look at the breakfast spread I had laid out and said, You made japchae, with the energy of someone who had just been personally gifted something. It was in the fridge, I said. Ingredients, I mean. I made the actual japchae. Nobody makes japchae for breakfast. I do, I said. It works. Try it before you have opinions. He tried it. He had no further opinions. He sat down and ate with the focused enthusiasm of someone who had been nutritionally neglected, which, looking at this household, I was beginning to think was genuinely possible. Daehyun did not come down. At 7:30, I put a covered plate outside his door at the end of the east hallway, knocked twice, and walked away before I could think too hard about why I was doing it. The morning passed in the specific way that first full days in new places always do, long and information, dense and slightly exhausting. I learned the house rules from the laminated sheet on my door. I learned the cleaning schedule from Manager O, who delivered information in the tone of someone reading a legal document. So I learned that the 3rd floor was not discussed and that the main office on the 2nd floor was locked with a keypad and that I was not to be curious about either of these things. I am an extremely curious person. This was going to be a problem. At noon, I was dusting the main sitting room bookshelf and my hand landed on a book spine before I registered what I was doing. The psychometry came fast and hard. Rage, grief. The specific texture of guilt that lives in your chest for years because you made a decision you can't unmake. Someone had held this book the way people hold things when they're trying to stay calm and failing. The emotion was old but not healed, preserved in the object like something pressed between pages. I put the book down carefully. I stood there for a second with my heart doing something irregular and my brain telling me to mind my own business. This is the thing about my ability that I genuinely hate. I don't get useful information. I don't get names or dates or explanations. I get feelings, raw and undiluted, and I have to carry them around until they fade without knowing who they belong to or what to do with them. Someone in this house was drowning in guilt, and I had absolutely no idea which one of the four it was. "You look like you saw something," said a voice behind me. I turned around. Da-hyun was standing in the doorway, and he was holding the empty plate from this morning. His expression was neutral, but his eyes were doing something careful and watchful that I was starting to recognize as his default setting. "Just dusting," I said. He looked at the book, then at my hand, then at my face. "You touched it," he said, not accusing, just quiet. "Bookshelves require contact to dust properly," I said. "That's how dusting works." He was quiet for a moment. "Thank you for the food," he said finally. I went and set the clean plate on the side table and left. I stared at the empty doorway. If you think I know what's happening in this house, I need you to understand that I absolutely do not. But I'm starting to think the real danger here isn't the mafia. It's the way Yoon Dae-hyun says thank you like it costs him something. If this story is already living in your chest and you need to know what happens next, so already hit that subscribe button right now and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Because what's coming in the next part? Nobody in this house is ready, including me. I spent the next hour turning that observation over in my head, like a stone I couldn't put down while I finished the sitting room, moved to the hallway, and tried very hard to dust things without touching them with my bare hands, which is genuinely difficult and also a metaphor for my entire life. One of the house settled into its afternoon rhythm around me. Muffled voices from the second floor, the occasional sound of movement from behind closed doors, the distant low frequency of what I was increasingly certain was a weapons locker being accessed somewhere above my head. But I had made a personal commitment to not knowing that. I was doing well, I was being professional, and then the power went out. Not the whole compound, just the east wing, which happened to be the wing containing the kitchen, the main sitting room, the hallway I was currently standing in, and according to the floor plan Manager O had given me, the private meeting room where all four of them had apparently gathered approximately 4 minutes ago. I know this because Sung-hoon appeared at the end of the hallway, looking genuinely unbothered by the darkness and said, "Oh good, you're already here." "I live here," I said. "What happened to the power?" "Circuit overload. Jae-ho's equipment pulls too much when everything runs at once." He tilted his head toward the meeting room door. "We need light. There are candles in the storage cabinet. Manager O is unreachable, and you know where things are." I looked at him. "You want me to go into the meeting room?" "We need light," he repeated pleasantly. "I thought I wasn't supposed to be present during meetings." "This isn't a meeting anymore," he said. The power killed the presentation. Now it's just four men sitting in the dark, which is a different thing entirely." I grabbed the candles. The meeting room was large, rectangular, and currently lit by exactly nothing. I pushed the door open with my elbow, candles tucked against my chest, and four pairs of eyes turned toward me with the synchronized attention of people whose survival instincts were always slightly switched on. "Delivery," I said, because someone had to say something. I set the candles on the central table and lit them one by one with the lighter from my pocket, because I am a person who carries a lighter. Don't ask. And the room filled slowly with warm, unsteady gold light that did absolutely no favors for anyone's face if your goal was to remain professionally detached. Jae-ho at the head of the table looked carved from something ancient. Minjun beside him looked like a painting that hadn't decided if it was a portrait or a warning. Sung-hoon was leaning back in his chair with his arms crossed, watching me with that easy smile that I still hadn't fully categorized. And Dae-hyun was at the far corner, forearms on the table, looking at the candle I had just lit in front of him, with an expression I couldn't name. The amber scent hit me again. Warmer in the enclosed space, more present. I took a step back toward the door. "Stay," Jae-ho said. I stopped. "When I have things to finish in the kitchen." "The kitchen has no power," he said. "Sit down." I looked at him. He looked at me. This was our second staring situation in one day, and I was beginning to think it was becoming a pattern. I sat down, at the far end of the table. in the chair closest to the door because I am sassy, not reckless. The thing about being trapped in candlelight with four alpha men who collectively smell like a very expensive and emotionally complicated forest is that your psychometry becomes extremely difficult to suppress. It lives in my hands. Touch base mostly, but in small enclosed spaces with high emotional density, it bleeds into the air and I start picking up residue without any physical contact at all. I felt it starting at the edges, low and background, like static. Shigeho carried authority so deeply embedded it had become structural, not performed, biological almost. The weight of someone who had been making decisions that affected other people's lives since he was young enough that it had simply become the shape of him. Minjun carried something sharper, hypervigilance with an old wound underneath it, the kind of wound that makes a person scan every room they enter and sit with their back to the wall. Sung-hoon was harder to read even atmospherically, on which told me he was either genuinely light or very deliberately constructed to appear that way. Both options were interesting. And Dae-hyun. Dae-hyun was sitting 4 feet away from me, and the amber warmth of him was doing something to the air that I needed to stop noticing immediately. "You're quiet," Sung-hoon observed, looking at me across the table. "I'm a servant," I said. "Quiet is in the job description. You weren't quiet last night. Last night the food was getting cold. Yet the situation required intervention." Minjin made a sound that was not quite a laugh. I filed it away. Jaeho was watching me again with that cataloging expression. "How long have you been placed through the agency?" 2 years, I said. "Previous households?" 3. "Why did you leave them?" I met his eyes steadily. The first one asked me to do things outside my job description. The second one thought my job description included being ignored when I spoke. The third one, I paused. The third one touched my things without asking. The candlelight moved. Nobody spoke. Daehyun looked up from the flame, and for one unguarded second, in the warm, unstable gold of 4 burning candles, he looked at me like I had just said something that mattered to him personally. I looked away first. That was new. I looked away first and I spent approximately 4 seconds being annoyed about it before the power came back on. The lights flooding the room with the kind of harsh overhead brightness that immediately killed whatever the candlelight had been building, and everyone blinked and the moment dissolved like it had never existed. Jaeho stood immediately, meeting posture back, the architecture of authority reassembling itself in real time. "We'll resume in 20 minutes, he said, and it was aimed at the other 3, not at me, which was my cue. I collected the candles before anyone could touch them and left. I made tea I didn't ask permission to make and stood in the kitchen drinking it while the power hummed steadily back through the east wing. And I gave myself a very firm internal lecture about the dangers of candlelight and enclosed spaces and men with amber sense who look at you like you've said something that matters. The lecture was thorough, professionally delivered, completely ignored by every part of me below the neck. I was on my second cup when Sung-hoon appeared in the kitchen doorway with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled up, and the specific energy of a man who had decided the meeting could wait. "You make tea when you're processing something," he said. "I make tea because I like tea," I said. "You made it after Daehyun looked at you." I set my cup down with more care than necessary. "I made it because the power came back and I could use the kettle again." Sung-hoon pulled out the stool across the island and sat down with the ease of someone who had decided we were going to have a conversation whether I participated or not. "How much did you pick up in there?" I went very still. "From the room," he added, his voice dropping just slightly. "You went quiet in a specific way, like you were hearing something nobody was saying out loud." I looked at him. His expression was open and genuinely curious, and there was no threat in it, which somehow made it more dangerous than a threat. "I don't know what you mean," I said. "Okay," he said easily. He reached across the island and picked up the extra cup I hadn't touched yet, poured himself tea from my pot without asking, and drank. "Good tea. Thank you." "Daehyun's been quiet for 8 months, he said, like we were continuing a conversation we'd already been having. Since the thing with his brother." I did not ask about the brother. I am a professional. "That's not my business." "No," Sung-hoon agreed. "But you picked it up anyway, didn't you?" It wasn't a question. I didn't answer it. He smiled at his cup. The agency told us you were good at reading environments. They didn't say how. I'm observant, I said carefully. Sure, he said. He finished the tea, stood, and tucked the stool back under the island. For what it's worth, Hunnam, whatever you felt in that room, none of it is aimed at you. These are men who have been carrying heavy things for a long time. He paused at the doorway. It's nice that someone noticed. He left before I could respond. I stood there holding my cup with my heart doing something complicated. I noticed things for the rest of the afternoon because noticing things is involuntary when you are me, and this house was saturated with them. I noticed that Jae-ho's office door had a scuff mark at knee height on the inside, the kind that comes from pacing in a small space for years. I noticed that Minjun kept a photograph face down on his desk, which I saw through the briefly open door and did not touch because I have limits, and also because face-down photographs are the universe's way of saying, please do not look at this. I am not ready. I noticed that Sung-hoon's room smelled like coffee and something medicinal underneath, and the kind of underneath that speaks of injuries managed privately. And I noticed that outside Daehyun's door at the end of the east hallway, where I had left his plate this morning, someone had placed a small ceramic figurine of a sparrow on the floor beside the doorframe. It was facing inward, toward his room. I crouched down and looked at it without touching it. It was worn smooth in places. Old. The kind of object that had been handled many times by the same hands. I stood up and walked away. I made it 4 steps. I went back. I picked it up. The psychometry came so fast and so hard that I sat down on the hallway floor without meaning to, my back against the wall, and the figurine burning in my palm like a coal. Not hot, not painful, just overwhelmingly present. A child's hands, small, holding this same sparrow in the dark. Someone singing, low and off-key, the kind of singing that happens when you're trying to make a small person feel safe. And then older hands, the same person but years later, holding it in a hospital waiting room, holding it outside a door that wouldn't open, holding it on a night so heavy with grief that the emotions soaked into the ceramic like water into stone. And underneath all of it, a name, not spoken but felt, the way names exist in grief. Seojin. I put the sparrow down exactly where I found it. I sat on the hallway floor for a moment longer than I should have. Then Daehyun's door opened, and he looked down at me. I looked up at him. I dropped something, I said. He looked at the sparrow, then at my face. His expression did the careful thing again. That deliberate neutral that I now understood was not coldness, but protection. Layers of it, built over a long time. Are you all right? He said quietly. And the thing was, he actually meant it. Fine, I said and stood up. Hana and walked away with my hands curled at my sides and Seojin's grief still fading from my palms, like warmth from a stone that had been in the sun. I was not fine, but that was not his problem to carry. He already had enough. I kept that thought close for the next 3 weeks like a personal policy. Daehyun had enough. They all had enough. My job was the food and the floors and the laundry and the careful management of a house that ran on tension and unspoken things. Hussein, and it was not my job to feel things about any of it. I was exceptionally good at my job. The cooking part anyway. The not feeling part was proving more difficult than advertised. 3 weeks into the Shin compound and I had developed what I could only describe as a situational awareness problem. I knew Jae-ho took his coffee before he was fully present in a room and should not be spoken to until the second cup. I knew Minjun ran at 5 a.m. along the compound perimeter and came back looser in the shoulders, which was the only time of day he looked like something other than a loaded weapon. I knew Sung-hoon laughed at things that weren't funny when he was uncomfortable and went completely silent when something actually bothered him, which was the inverse of most people, and therefore twice as easy to misread. And I knew that Daehyun left his window open at night, even in the cold, because I could see the light under his door shift when the hallway temperature dropped. I knew too much about all of them. This was the psychometry's fault. Partially. The rest of it was just me being me, which is a person who notices things and cannot stop. The outside contact started because of Sung-hoon. He mentioned casually during one of his uninvited kitchen visits, and that there was an omegaverse bookshop in the Songdo district that stayed open late on Thursdays. He mentioned it the way people mention things they want you to pursue, but won't say directly. I went on a Thursday because I had 2 hours free and I was tired of the inside of my own head. The owner's name was Cha Hyun-woo, 26, Omega. The kind of person who inhabited a space so completely that the space seemed built around him. And the bookshop smelled like paper and pine resin and something warm underneath. And he made me tea I didn't ask for and showed me a shelf of books he described as for people who feel too much, with the directness of someone who had already figured out what I was. I went back the following Thursday, and the one after that. I want to be extremely clear about what Cha Hyun-woo was and was not. He was not a love interest. He was not a threat. He was a person who understood what it meant to be an Omega in a world structured around alpha convenience, who had built something entirely his own in a Songdo shopfront, and who made excellent tea and did not ask me invasive questions. He was also, I discovered on my third visit, the younger brother of a man who ran a competing operation to the Shin family in the Incheon district. He did not know I lived at the Shin compound. I did not know who his brother was until he mentioned the name, and I felt every hair on my arm stand up simultaneously. I stayed for the tea. I went home thinking very hard. I came home that Thursday at 10:47 p.m., and I know the exact time because I checked my phone in the entryway, and the screen said 10:47, and the house was not dark the way it should have been. The sitting room light was on. All four of them were in it. This had never happened before. And they occupied the same house, but they didn't congregate without purpose. And Thursday evenings had no scheduled purpose. I stood in the entryway holding my jacket and registered the tableau in the sitting room. Jae-ho on the far couch with his arms crossed. Minjun by the window, which was his threat assessment position. Sung-hoon on the armchair, no easy smile, which meant something actually bothered him. And Dae-hyun standing near the hallway entrance. Iman, which meant he was the first one I made eye contact with. His expression was doing something I hadn't seen before. Not careful, not neutral, something tighter than that and more complicated. Then I understood. They could all smell it. 3 Thursdays in a bookshop with another Omega who had a warm pine resin scent that apparently adhered to clothing meant that I had walked into the Shin compound at 10:47 p.m., carrying someone else's scent on my jacket like a confession I hadn't meant to make. One of the silence had texture. "You're home late," Jae-ho said. His voice was exactly as level as always, which somehow made it worse. "I had time off," I said. "You approved it." "I did," he said. "I didn't ask where you went." "Then I'm not sure what the atmosphere in this room is about," I said, which was a lie because I was absolutely sure, and my psychometry didn't even need to activate for this one. Minjun turned from the window. "Ooh, you smell like another Omega." "I was at a bookshop," I said. "The owner is an Omega. We had tea." "Which bookshop?" Minjun said. "The one in Songdo." Something passed between Jae-ho and Minjun, fast and wordless, the kind of communication that lives in years of shared history. Daehyun had not moved from the hallway entrance. He was looking at my jacket with an expression that I suddenly, with the specific clarity of someone whose gift deals in emotional residue, recognized as something very close to hurt. Not anger, hurt. My chest did something inconvenient. "I'll start breakfast prep," I said, because I needed to move before I said something I couldn't take back. "Rio," Sung-hoon said. I stopped. "The bookshop owner," he said carefully. "What's his surname?" I looked at him. His face was serious in the way it only got when something had genuinely landed. "Cha," I said. "If you think you know what's coming next, I promise you that you don't. Hit that subscribe button right now and tell me where you're watching from, because next part is where this house stops being quiet about everything it's been hiding." The room temperature dropped 3 degrees and nobody moved, and I stood there in the entryway holding my jacket watching 4 men process a surname like it was a detonation. Jae-ho uncrossed his arms. Slow, deliberate, the kind of movement that precedes a decision. Minjun turned fully from the window for the first time since I walked in. Sung-hoon put down his cup, and Dae-hyun quietly said, "How many times?" Not loudly, not with aggression, just with the specific weight of someone asking a question they already partially know the answer to and are hoping to be wrong about. "How many times have you been to that bookshop?" he said. 3 Thursdays, I said. "It's a bookshop. He makes good tea and he doesn't ask me intrusive questions. Yes, which has been a refreshing change of pace. You didn't know, Sung-hoon said, and it landed somewhere between a question and an answer he was giving himself. Know what? I said. Someone explain what cha is a problem. Jae-ho stood up. When Jae-ho stood up in a room, it changed the geometry of it. Everything reorganized around him without his asking. He walked to the window where Minjin had been standing and looked out at the compound garden and the darkness beyond the walls and said, when with his back to me, Cha Hyun-woo's brother controls the eastern distribution corridor that we have been in a territorial dispute with for 14 months. I processed this. I didn't know that, I said. I know you didn't, Jae-ho said. That's the only reason this conversation is calm. This is calm, I said. Yes, Minjin said flatly. This is calm. I want to tell you I handled the next 10 minutes with grace and professionalism. I did not. So let me understand this correctly, I said, because I could feel something building in my chest that was equal parts anger and something more complicated underneath it. I went to a bookshop on my approved time off, and the problem is not that I was in any danger or that I did anything wrong. The problem is that I came home smelling like someone whose last name is inconvenient for your business operations. The problem, Minjin said, is that Cha Hyun-woo is not accidental. His brother has been looking for leverage against this household for 14 months, and you walked into his brother's shop 3 times. I walked into a bookshop because someone, I looked directly at Sung-hoon, mentioned it to me specifically. Sung-hoon had the grace to look briefly, genuinely uncomfortable. I didn't know he'd opened a shop in Songdo. I knew him before the dispute. That's not an excuse. No, I agreed. It's really not. Rio, Jae-ho said, turning from the window. Don't, I said, and my voice came out steadier than I felt, which was the one thing I was grateful for. Don't do the calm authority voice right now. I am a person who works in your house and follows your rules and has not once crossed a line I was told about. I went to a bookshop. If that is a security problem, then tell me things I need to know to avoid security problems instead of letting me walk into them on my approved time off. Silence, the real kind. And the kind that happens when something true has been said in a room full of people who aren't used to being spoken to that way. Jae-ho looked at me for a long moment. You're right, he said. I blinked. That was not what I expected. We should have briefed you more thoroughly, he said. That was an oversight, and it put you in an unnecessary position. I apologize. I stood there holding my jacket and feeling the anger lose some of its structural support. Okay, I said, because I didn't have anything more prepared than that. But then Dae-hyun said it. He said it quietly, the way he said most things, and maybe he didn't intend it the way it landed. And maybe the exhaustion of the evening made me hear it sharper than it was meant. But he said it, and I heard it, and it hit the exact place in my chest that had already been bruised by the last hour. You should have told us where you were going, he said, if you had just told us. And something in me cracked. What? Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a clean break along a line that had been under pressure for 3 weeks. I am not yours to report to, I said, and my voice was quiet too, which made it worse somehow. 2 quiet people saying devastating things in a room that had no space left for them. I am not a member of this pack. I am not bonded to any of you. I work here. I cook your food and I clean your house, and I follow every rule I was given. But I do not owe you my whereabouts on my free time because you are not my alphas. The words sat in the room like a stone dropped in still water. Not my alphas. I watched it reach all 4 of them differently. Jae-ho's jaw tightened. Minjin looked away. Sung-hoon's expression went through something swift and painful. And Dae-hyun, who had said the thing that cracked me, looked like I had said something that hurt him in a place he thought was already too defended to reach. Good, she said, a small, mean part of me. The rest of me felt terrible. I'm going to bed, I said, before anything else could break. I'll have breakfast ready at 7. I walked to my room. I closed the door. I sat on the edge of my bed with my jacket still in my hands and the amber warmth of Dae-hyun's scent still faintly in the hallway air outside my door, and the words "not my alphas" echoing back at me with a feeling I was not prepared to name. Because here is the thing I didn't say out loud. Here is the thing that is entirely, completely, catastrophically my problem. I wanted them to be. I sat with that for a long time in the dark of my room, With my jacket across my knees and the compound settling into its nighttime quiet around me, and the full weight of what I had just admitted to myself pressing down on my sternum like a hand that wasn't moving. 22 years old. Park Ryo, certified Omega. 43,001 to his name 1 month ago, and apparently also completely, inconveniently, against every professional instinct and personal survival rule he had ever developed. Attached to all four of them. Not equally, not the same way, but genuinely, which was somehow worse than if it had been simple. I wanted Jae-ho to look at me like I was worth cataloging because he chose to, not because I was a variable in his household. And I wanted Minjun to stop sitting with his back to the wall when I was in the room because somewhere in the past 3 weeks he had started to, and I had noticed and I had felt it like a gift I hadn't earned. I wanted Sung-hoon to keep having uninvited kitchen conversations because they were the closest thing to being seen I had felt in years. And I wanted Dae-hyun to pick up his empty plate and say thank you like it cost him something, and I wanted to understand what it cost him and why he let me see it even when he hid everything else. I put my jacket down. I pressed my palms flat against my thighs. This is the part, I told myself firmly, where a smart person makes a decision. Either you pack your bags and call the agency tomorrow and protect yourself from something that will not end well, or you figure out what you actually want and you stop pretending the answer is nothing. I am a smart person. I sat there for 40 minutes making no decision at all. It was the sparrow that moved me, not metaphorically, literally. I was sitting on my bed staring at the wall when I heard the faint sound from the hallway, a small ceramic scrape against the floor, and I opened my door without thinking and looked down. The sparrow figurine was sitting outside my door. Not Dae-hyun's door, mine. I picked it up before I could stop myself and the psychometry came, but it was different this time, newer. Recent emotions still warm in the ceramic like breath on glass. Not the old grief I had felt before. This was something present, deliberate, the careful warmth that I had come to associate with him, but closer to the surface than he ever let it get in person. An apology that didn't know how to be spoken, and underneath it, in the emotional sediment of the object, in the thing he had pressed into it by holding it too long before he put it down. I see you. Not words, never words with him. Just the feeling of being looked at by someone who understood the weight of being looked at. I stood in my doorway for 10 seconds. Then I walked down the hallway in my socks. His door was closed, but the light was on underneath it. I knocked twice, the same way I knocked when I left his breakfast, and there was a pause, and then the door opened. Dae-hyun looked at me. His hair was slightly undone from its usual order. He was still dressed, but his collar was open, and he looked like a person who had been sitting in a room trying to decide something for the last 40 minutes too. I held up the sparrow. He looked at it, then at me. You didn't have to, I said. I shouldn't have touched it in the first place. That was my mistake, and I don't need an apology for catching the consequences of my own decisions. He was quiet. But, I said, and my voice did something I didn't fully authorize, something softer. Thank you for the way you said it. I shouldn't have said what I said earlier, he said. His voice was low and direct and had none of the deflection I expected. You were right. You don't owe us your schedule. I said it because I was. He stopped. I was worried. That's not your responsibility to manage. It's not, I agreed, but it's not nothing either. He looked at me for a long moment. Hey, what do you mean? He said carefully. And here is where Park Ryo, who has survived on sharp edges and professional distance for 2 years, did the thing that smart people don't do. I told the truth. I mean that when I walked in tonight and the whole sitting room was lit up at 10:47 p.m., I felt something before I understood what it was, I said. And I called it an inconvenience, and I called you all a security apparatus, and I said, not my alphas, like it didn't cost me anything. I held his gaze. It cost me something. The hallway was very quiet. Dae-hyun reached out slowly, the way you move around something you don't want to startle, and took the sparrow from my hand. His fingers brushed my palm in the exchange, and the psychometry ignited instantly, and I let it, which I never do. And what came through was not careful this time. Not protected, just warm and present and directed entirely at me, like a door swung open in a room that had been closed for 8 months. I breathed. Rio, he said, and the way he said my name, just my name, no title, no distance, landed in my chest like something coming home. And then from down the hallway, unhurried and inevitable, came the sound of three other doors opening. I looked up. Jae-ho, Minjun, Sung-hoon. My standing in the hallway, in various states of having also been awake for the last 40 minutes, making no decisions. Sung-hoon looked at the two of us and then at the sparrow in Daehyun's hand and said very quietly, "Oh, thank goodness. Someone finally moved first." Minjun looked at me with the expression I now understood was not threat assessment, but the specific focused attention of a person who was trying very hard not to show that something mattered. Jae-ho said nothing. He just looked at me the way he had looked at me on the very first night, cataloging, assessing, except this time what I saw underneath it was not calculation. It was want, honest and unguarded and clearly inconvenient for him. I looked at all four of them standing in this hallway at whatever time it was, and I thought about 43,001 and a cracked phone screen and an iron gate that warned me. I touched it anyway, I told myself, and I smiled. Someone put a kettle on, I said. This conversation is going to take a while. That someone was me, because apparently even in the most emotionally significant moment of my recent life, I was still the one who knew where everything was in this kitchen, and nobody else was going to do it correctly. They followed me in, all four of them, filling the kitchen the way they had filled the sitting room on my first night, except this time there was no performance of indifference, no careful positioning, no one pretending to look somewhere else. Jae-ho sat at the island. Actually sat, not perched with one foot already aimed at an exit. Minjun leaned against the counter beside the window and crossed his arms, but the set of his shoulders was different. Lower, like something had been put down. Sung-hoon sat on the counter itself, which I normally would have had opinions about, and I let it go because tonight was not a night for opinions about counter hygiene. Daehyun stood beside me while I made the tea. Close enough that his arm almost touched mine. Not touching, almost. The almost was doing significant things to my concentration. I made the tea. I poured 5 cups. I slid them across the island, and I sat down on my own stool, and I looked at all 4 of them, and I said, "All right, someone talk first, and it cannot be me, because I have been the most honest person in this room for the last hour, and I need a break." Sung-hoon laughed, the real kind. Yamper, and then Jae-ho spoke. He did not speak the way I expected. No authority architecture, no surgical precision. He wrapped both hands around his cup and looked at the steam rising from it and said, "I noticed you on the 3rd day, not the 1st. The 1st I was assessing. The 3rd morning you told me Americano was black coffee with water, and you were completely right, and I spent the rest of that day irritated about it." I stared at him. "That's when you started watching the coffee?" I said. That's when I started watching you," he said, and looked up, and the directness of it after weeks of careful neutrality hit me somewhere behind my ribs. Minjin made a sound that was almost a laugh. "He made me check your agency file twice. Said there was something he wanted to verify." "There was," Jae-ho said, unapologetic. "What were you verifying?" I said. "Whether you were real," he said simply. "People don't push back in this house. You pushed back on day 1. I needed to know if it was performance or character." "It's character," I said. "I know," he said. "That's the problem." Minjin went next, which surprised me because Minjin speaking voluntarily about anything interior was roughly as common as weather events. "The photograph on my desk," he said. I went still. "You saw it," he said, "through the door. So I know because you've never touched my door frame, and every other surface in this house has your fingerprints somewhere on it." I opened my mouth. "I'm not angry," he said. "My brother's in that photograph. We don't speak. It's been 4 years, and it is the one thing in my life that I have not been able to strategize my way out of." He looked at his cup. "You walk past that door every day for 3 weeks, and you never asked. And do you know how rare that is?" "I figured it wasn't my business," I said quietly. "It isn't," he said, "but most people ask anyway. You didn't." He looked at me directly for the first time without the scanning quality, just looking, just present. "I noticed that." The kitchen was very quiet. I notice everything, I said honestly. I just try not to use it without permission. Minjun nodded once, slow and deliberate. I know, he said. Ikana, that's why I'm telling you. Sung-hoon told me about the medicinal smell. Surgery, 8 months ago. A job that went wrong in a way that none of them talked about, and that had rearranged the internal geography of this household in ways I had been feeling in the walls since day one without understanding the shape of it. He told it lightly, the way he told most things. But his hands were still on his cup, and his knuckles were slightly white, and I understood that light delivery was his form of courage, not his form of avoidance. Daehyun sat outside my room for 3 days, he said. Didn't come in, didn't say anything, just sat there. I looked at Daehyun. He was looking at his tea. Seojin, I said softly, and the name landed in the room like something delicate. Daehyun looked up. His brother, Sung-hoon said quietly, died 14 months ago. Same night the dispute with Cha's family started. Not a coincidence. I held Daehyun's gaze. I didn't say I'm sorry because I'm sorry is what people say when they have nothing real to offer. Instead, I said, the sparrow was his. Yes, Daehyun said, and you put it outside my door. Yes. Why? He was quiet for a moment. Then, because you touched it and you didn't flinch. Hana, you sat on the hallway floor and you put it back exactly where it was, and you walked away and you never said a word about it. His voice was steady, but the steadiness was the kind that cost something to maintain. Seojin would have liked you. He liked people who felt things and kept moving anyway. I breathed carefully through the tightness in my chest. I would have liked him too, I said. We stayed in that kitchen until the windows went from black to deep blue to the particular gray that means morning is deciding whether to commit. At some point, Minjun made more tea, which was either a sign of personal growth or a sign that nobody wanted to be the first to break the spell of what was happening in this kitchen, and I chose to interpret it as both. At some point, Jaeho's hand covered mine on the island. Not dramatically, just settled there, warm and deliberate, the way he did everything. And I turned my hand over and held it back. At some point, Sung-hoon leaned his head briefly against my shoulder from where he'd migrated to the stool beside mine, and I let him because it felt like something he had needed to do for a long time, and I was not going to be the person who made him ask. And at some point, Daehyun, standing beside me in the kitchen where I had made his covered plate on the very first morning, said quietly, "You're not leaving. Sure are you?" Not a question, an almost question. The kind that has hope folded inside it and is too careful to unfold it fully without permission. I looked at him. I touched your iron gate on the first day, I said. It told me there was trouble inside. 4 kinds of it. I looked around at all of them. At Jaeho with his hand warm over mine. At Minjun, who had given me the rarest thing he owned, which was honesty. At Sung-hoon, whose easy laugh had been hiding real weight for months. One at Daehyun with his sparrow and his amber scent, and the name Seojun living carefully in his chest. I touched it anyway, I said. Daehyun smiled. Not the barely there half smile that disappeared before it arrived. A real one, full and present and aimed entirely at me, and it was, without competition, the most devastating thing I had seen in this house. And I had seen a lot of devastating things. Good, he said, and then, because Park Ryo does not do anything halfway and the sun was coming up over the Incheon skyline through the kitchen window, and I had 43,001 4 weeks ago, and now I had something worth considerably more. I reached up and pulled him down by the collar and kissed him in the middle of the kitchen with morning light starting to fill the room. He kissed me back like he had been waiting 8 months for something to feel this uncomplicated. Behind us, Sung-hoon said, finally, so emphatically that Minjun told him to be quiet, and Jaeho, still holding my hand on the island, said nothing at all, but his grip got warmer. I pulled back and looked at Daehyun, and then at the other 3, and I felt it. Not through psychometry, not through residue or objects or atmospheric emotional sediment, but just directly, plainly, in real time. This house, which had smelled like danger and expensive cologne on the first night, had now smelled like 5 people in a kitchen at dawn who had chosen each other. I let go of Daehyun's collar and smoothed it flat with my palm. I'm making breakfast, I announced. Sit down, all of you. And Sung-hoon, get off my counter. He got off the counter, grinning. Minjin sat down without being asked twice, which was new. Jae-ho released my hand slowly, like he was in no hurry, which was also new, and moved to his seat at the island. And Daehyun stayed beside me while I cooked. Well, close enough that his arm touched mine. Not almost this time, actually. And I let the warmth of it move through me without filing it away, or naming it a professional hazard, or telling myself it meant nothing. It meant everything. I touched the iron gate anyway. Best decision I ever made with 43,001 and a cracked phone screen. And just like that, the story of Park Ryo and the four alphas who hid everything until he walked in smelling like someone else comes to its very first ending, which also happens to be a beginning. Thank you so much for staying until the very last word. That means more than you know. If this story lived in your chest the way I hoped it would, please hit that subscribe button right now, because there are more stories exactly like this one waiting for you. More omegas who push back. More alphas with too many walls and not enough reasons to keep them up. More moments in candlelight and dawn kitchens and hallways where someone finally moves first. Subscribe, drop a comment telling me where you are watching from, and tell me which of the four alphas got you first. Thank you for watching. See you in the next one.